In 2014, a small startup, founded just 5 years earlier, sold for a staggering $19 billion. This massive sum sent shockwaves through the tech industry, leaving many wondering, what could be worth so much? The answer didn't lie in cutting-edge hardware or complex algorithms, but in resolving a very simple problem. Picture staying connected with friends and family without racking up hefty phone bills. This was the problem two friends set out to solve, driven by personal frustration and a vision of a more connected world. Their solution was an app that would make text messages obsolete and allow communication regardless of distance or borders. I'm, of course, talking about WhatsApp. WhatsApp is the messaging phenomenon that took the world by storm. By 2023, this once humble app had amassed 2 billion monthly active users, meaning that more than a quarter of the human population uses WhatsApp to communicate. So now, imagine being jobless right after one of the worst recessions in history. That's exactly where Brian and Jan were, right as they embarked on their journey to change their fortunes forever. It was 2009, and the world was reeling from the Great Recession. Brian Acton and Jan Koum found themselves in a peculiar situation, unemployed and uncertain about their future. But sometimes, the most challenging circumstances breed the most innovative ideas. Jan Koum, a Ukrainian immigrant who grew up on food stamps, had an unlikely path to Silicon Valley. He was the only child of a housewife and construction manager in a small village outside of Kiev. He taught himself computer networking through a series of manuals bought from a used bookstore. His home had no hot water, and his parents couldn't even speak on their telephone for fears that it was tapped by the state. At the age of 16, Jan and his mother would emigrate to the USA due to the troubling political landscape in the Soviet Union. He would attend school and college before taking a job at Yahoo. In 1997, he formed a special bond with a colleague named Brian, where the office antics were all a bit too touchy-feely, in his own words. Brian was straight to the point. For lack of a better term, there was no bullshit, something Jan valued and admired. Jan was still attending university when just 2 weeks into his job at Yahoo, he got a very important call. On the phone was David Philo, one of Yahoo's co-founders, who informs Jan that one of the Yahoo servers has broken down. Trying to keep his voice low, Jan told David he was in the middle of class, to which David told him to leave and head straight to the office. Jan would drop out of university not long after, as he preferred being in the Yahoo office. In 2000, Jan's mother would pass away due to cancer, and all of a sudden he was alone in a foreign country. It's at this time when Brian would step in to support Jan, spending time at Brian's house, going skiing and playing soccer. From 2000 until 2007, the pair would work together at Yahoo and watch it go through many ups and downs. Brian invested heavily in the dot-com boom in the late 1990s and lost millions during the crash at the turn of the millennium. So, for the next 7 years, both Brian and Jan would grow increasingly tired of their jobs at Yahoo. Brian has stated in interviews that he was depressed, that instead of improving people's lives, he was improving how ads worked on people. Both men describe how they could see the misery painted on each other's faces while in the office. But that would all change in 2007. In September 2007, both Brian and Jan would leave Yahoo without any idea of what came next. They had no plan other than to take a break and enjoy life. They had prepared savings at Yahoo, should this time ever come, and they were right to do so. As for the next year, they'd spend time traveling around South America, living a life they couldn't experience while working a corporate 9 to 5. Eventually, though, they were alerted that Facebook was hiring in 2009. This was right after its popularity had exploded, replacing existing social platforms such as MySpace. Now felt like the perfect time to get on board. With that in mind, both Brian and Jan applied, and both were unsuccessful. As they said it themselves, they're both part of the Facebook Reject Club. But life was about to take the pair down a completely different path. In 2009, Jan bought an iPhone and began to explore all the wonderful apps that the device could support. This was a completely new concept at the time, when smartphones were beginning to replace Nokia bricks and flip phones. The Apple App Store was also only 7 months old at the time. Jan knew it was only a matter of time before it exploded, and a whole new ecosystem of apps and businesses would be born. Jan had a Russian friend named Alex, who would often invite members of the local Russian community to his home for weekly pizza and movie nights. Jan can recall that oftentimes 40 people would gather at the house to chat, eat, and share ideas. On one particular night, Jan remembers standing in Alex's kitchen, chatting for hours about an app idea. Jan's idea involved the contact list on his iPhone. He thought it would be a great idea to show statuses next to each contact. This would tell people if you were busy, free, or your phone had low battery. Jan felt confident that he could develop some parts of the app. But since he was so new to the iPhone, he needed a competent iPhone developer. This is when he resorted to rentacoder.com, where he met Igor. Jan immediately chose the name WhatsApp, as it was a play on What's Up. In February 2009, 1 week after discussing the app idea in Alex's kitchen, Jan incorporated WhatsApp Inc. in California. The app hadn't even been written yet, but Jan had spent days pouring his heart and soul into creating the back-end code, which would sync his phone with any number in the world. This involved creating entries for every international dialing prefix. The first versions of WhatsApp weren't short on issues. Jan had Alex and a few of his Russian friends download and use the app, which would repeatedly crash or stop responding. One day, Alex and Jan met up to discuss the many issues with WhatsApp, which Jan noted in one of his Soviet-era notebooks, which his mother brought all the way from Ukraine when he was 16. These were notebooks saved for his most important projects. The following month, when Jan met up with Brian, he admitted a sense of defeat, telling Brian it was time to quit and find another job. A sentiment Brian didn't share. "You'd be an idiot to quit now," Brian told Jan, as he encouraged him to give it a few more months. In June 2009, Apple launched push notifications for the iPhone. This lets developers notify users using pings even when they weren't using the phone. With this came an update for WhatsApp, as Jan used push notifications to notify contacts when statuses were changed. So, if you changed your status to "I'm busy in a meeting," it would alert your contacts of your new status using a push notification. Despite this intended usage, Alex and their Russian friends would start using it with silly statuses like, "I woke up late and hey, how are you?" And all of a sudden, it became more of a group messaging platform, as opposed to a means of checking the status of your contacts. Eventually, his friends would be having full-on conversations through the statuses and push notifications. Jan remembers sitting in his home, using the development tools on his Mac Mini, and watching all the changing statuses from his Russian friends on WhatsApp. Then he realized he'd inadvertently created an instant messaging platform. But the main hook with WhatsApp was the cost. BlackBerry Messenger, or BBM, had come out a few years prior and was the only other free texting service at the time. BBM could only work between BlackBerry phones. While it was a massive selling point for the device, and many people went out of their way to buy a BlackBerry solely for BBM, there was still a massive untapped market out there. All of a sudden, Jan had created an instant messaging service linked to phone numbers which would let you message across any distance or border for free. In August 2009, Jan completed WhatsApp 2.0, which included a dedicated messaging component. He watched his little app explode from a few Russian friends to over 250,000 users. Not long after the release of WhatsApp 2.0, Jan reached out to his old friend Brian, who was still unemployed and working on his own startup idea, which truthfully wasn't going anywhere. The pair sat around Brian's dining table and began sending each other messages on WhatsApp. Brian realized the potential for creating a much smoother texting experience, recalling the difficulties in texting images and videos, which often didn't work. WhatsApp would eventually be the solution. With this in mind, Brian was on board. WhatsApp was now the joint venture of Brian Acton and Jan Koum. The pair worked out of the Red Rock Cafe, which is a popular co-working spot for budding entrepreneurs and startups in California. A month after the launch of WhatsApp 2.0, Brian reached out to friends he made while working at Yahoo. After selling the idea of WhatsApp to them, he managed to get 5 previous Yahoo employees to invest $250,000 in seed funding. Every single day, the pair would wake up to messages from iPhone users speaking about their desperation to WhatsApp international friends who used Android devices. At this point, WhatsApp was released exclusively on the Apple App Store, meaning WhatsApp messages had to be sent between iPhones. So Jan knew they had to proceed forward to produce a version of WhatsApp that would work on any smartphone. Jan and Brian would reach out to their contacts, seeking help in bringing WhatsApp to non-Apple devices. Through their contacts, they'd bring on Chris Pfeiffer and Michael Donoghue, as well as other engineers. For the first few years, Brian and Jan worked for free, taking home not a single cent. Their biggest cost early on was sending verification texts to users upon sign-up. This had to be done via SMS. For this, they'd use third-party SMS brokers, who would charge under 5 cents per text in the USA. However, other markets, such as Middle Eastern countries, would cost significantly more, averaging at around 65 cents per text. This was enough to quickly eat up Jan's funds, and even nowadays, WhatsApp spends over $500,000 per month on verification. By good fortunes, however, WhatsApp began bringing in roughly $5,000 per month in Q1 2010. This was enough to cover outgoing costs. Throughout the first couple of years, Brian and Jan would occasionally switch the app between free and paid on the App Store to slow down their growth. This is an interesting strategy when you think about it. They knew a sudden surge in users could empty their coffers with hefty SMS charges. By 2011, WhatsApp was in the top 20 apps in the USA App Store. Suddenly, the press and investors were determined to speak to the two guys who revolutionized worldwide communications. But Brian and Jan stayed grounded, refusing to meet with media giants, and instead working on their product. After lengthy talks with investors, they'd eventually agree to take on $8 million in seed funding, adding to the $250,000 they had previously raised. 2 years later, as of Q1 2013, WhatsApp's user base had surged to a massive 200 million. Brian and Jan had also created a workforce of 50 employees. With an ever-increasing staff count, Brian and Jan agreed to hold a second funding round for WhatsApp. From this, the same investor, Sequoia, who previously invested $8 million, would this time invest a further $50 million. This brought WhatsApp to a valuation of $1.5 billion. Only 4 years after Jan stood in his friend's crowded kitchen, talking about his little idea for an app. An idea which was in reality so far away from what it would eventually become. But the most important step Jan made was his pivot from a status app to instant messaging. It would have been easy for Jan to double down and stop users from engaging in the wrong behavior on the app. But Jan watched how they interacted and instead made changes to his own approach. After the latest round of funding, Brian took a screenshot of the WhatsApp bank balance, which read $8,257,000. 1 year later, in February 2014, it was announced that Facebook, the company that turned Jan and Brian away previously, were acquiring WhatsApp, 1 year after being valued at $1.5 billion. Facebook acquired WhatsApp for $19 billion US. At the time, it was the largest acquisition of a venture capital-backed company in history. Sequoia Capital, who had funded WhatsApp with $58 million, received approximately 5,000% return on their initial investment. From the Facebook acquisition, Brian and Jan received $4 billion in cash, $12 billion in Facebook shares, and $3 billion in restricted stock. 6 months later, in August 2014, WhatsApp was the most popular messaging app in the world, housing over 600 million users worldwide. 4 months after that, they were up to 700 million users. Then, WhatsApp would hit the surreal milestone of 1 billion monthly users in February 2016. Exactly 7 years after Jan introduced a few of his Russian friends to his contact list project, he had changed the means of communications for nearly a quarter of the entire human population, and their user counts didn't slow down. As of 2024, WhatsApp is used by over 2 billion people each month. But what happened to Brian and Jan? In September 2017, Brian left the company to start a non-profit. He has since stated his decision to leave was due to Facebook questioning the encryption that made it appealing to so many, as well as the decision to build the groundwork for implementing targeted ads. Not long after Brian left, the details of the Cambridge Analytica scandal began to surface. Brian doesn't enjoy the spotlight that being a successful entrepreneur brings, so he likely saw the writing on the wall. Brian's choice to leave Facebook and WhatsApp at this stage cost him $850,000, further reinforcing his desire to leave. And what happened to Jan? 7 months later, Jan followed suit, leaving in April 2018. Again, voicing concerns of privacy, advertising, and the monetization of WhatsApp as his motivating factors to leave. Between them, the pair gave up roughly $1.3 billion in unvested stock options. Now, Jan invests via his firm Newlands and is building a portfolio of startups. Meanwhile, Brian started Signal Foundation as a competitor to WhatsApp, with an emphasis on private communication. From a single idea in a crowded kitchen to a revolutionary app used by billions. That is the story of WhatsApp. Brian and Jan's story is one of adaptability and persistence. Both guys were miserable at their day job, living an unfulfilled life, leaving it behind with no plans or goals. They were then rejected by Facebook and left to question their ability and purpose. The breakthrough came when they got started on something and didn't stop. So, with that in mind, to all the dreamers and future entrepreneurs watching this, your idea doesn't have to be perfect from the start. It might become something completely different along the way. What matters is that you start, listen to your audience, and be willing to adapt. Remember, every major success story started with someone asking, "What if?" and opening a new project for the first time. So what is your what if? Who knows? Maybe your kitchen table could brainstorm the next big idea that changes the world.